Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Raul Ruiz. He is the CEO and founder of Raul Ruiz and Associates. Welcome, Raul.
Hey, good to be here.
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Sure, absolutely. So I've been in recruiting for about 20 years now. Started with a telecommunications company in Northwest Arkansas as a recruiter. Did technical recruiting, call center recruiting, marketing, HR, anything that you could think of within the telecommunications field. Then I moved into working for a government contractor. So I did that for a couple of years, did staffing for a couple of years. Most recently, I've been with Deloitte, was there for about 3 years. I did cyber IT, cybersecurity roles, ITGC roles, internal audit, external audit. So that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. Decided to go on my own here April of last year, and have been doing that for almost a year now. Time flies, doesn't it, when you're having fun?
Oh, yeah.
So I've been doing it for almost a year. Enjoyed the heck out of it. Recruiting for cyber, IT, and CPG.
Very cool. And for those that don't know, CPG stands for?
Consumer packaged goods.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Interesting eclectic mix there. Yeah, obviously my focus is security. So, that will be kind of, I guess, the focus of this conversation. But I guess in the security field, there's these numbers floating around, millions of unfilled security jobs. People say there's some sort of talent gap. Would you say that the talent gap is a real thing?
I think it is. I think it really is. It depends on the industry, of course, the actual companies that you're representing at the time. But I think there is a gap there between what they're actually looking for and what's actually out there in the market. Because I will say in the last 18 to 24 months, there's been a lot of layoffs within the industry, as you well know. So there's a lot of individuals looking for work. There's a lot of people looking for those positions that have been coveted for the last, 24, 36 months. So with that being said, these individuals have been in the marketplace for the last 18 months looking for the work. So what companies are doing, they're laying off individuals and kind of doing more with less, which brings us to the question is, what are we going to do? What's going to happen? How is this going to get fixed? Eventually there's going to be a down cycle where these companies will need to go ahead and do some hiring. They're going to have to revamp their talent pool, their staffing. I mean, you can't do more with less. It's been proven over and over again, to show the numbers that you had back in 2020, 2021, 2022. It's almost impossible to match. But there will have to be some changes where these folks will need to come back and be in the workforce for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to not really know what we're going to do with everybody because there seems to be a mismatch between the number of open jobs and the number of job seekers on the market. Or maybe it's just that we have a matching problem where there's roughly a similar amount of jobs and job seekers, but they're just having trouble finding each other and making those matches. What do you think what are the primary problems there that are preventing good people that would be good fits for certain jobs to actually get those jobs?
Yeah, well, I think that it's trying to hire somebody who has 10 years of experience that just graduated college or that have just gotten their certifications. You're not going to hire somebody at the senior level, at the senior salary range, at a junior level pay. So that right there is the first problem. You can't expect somebody to start working at a company for $175,000, $200,000 that they're really going to be making 100,000 somewhere else, so that gap right there is just tremendous. I mean, you need to go ahead and hire individuals that are worth the market. You can't hire individuals that are making, like I said, $100,000 and expect them to go ahead and come right in with 20 years of experience. They're not going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So one, I guess, way of putting it that's come up in previous episodes is an expectation gap. So the candidates expect one thing, usually higher salaries than the companies are willing to offer. And then the companies expect more experience than maybe any person on earth actually has, with a specific variety of technologies or whatever it may be. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of incumbent on us recruiters that specialize in the industry to help adjust expectations a little bit, both on, the candidate side as well as the hiring side. The question is who's listening, you don't always hear, or you don't always get, willing participants in that conversation, in my experience. So
yeah, and I think it boils down to the talent acquisition team, whether it's the recruiter, the agency, or the talent acquisition team, is that they need to go ahead and relay that message to the hiring managers, to the organization, so they can better understand what they're actually looking for. Sometimes they feel that, hey, if we pay this person this amount of money, they're going to come work for us. It's not always the case. There needs to be a culture. There needs to be an understanding of what the expectations are, what the role actually truly is versus what you're actually expecting. That gap right there needs to be closed up, and it needs to be communicated both by the recruiter, whether it's a corporate recruiter or an agency recruiter, and or the hiring manager when it comes time to interview. So that communication is crucial. And if it's not communicated at the beginning, it's not going to lead to a good relationship between you and the candidate.
Yeah. Well, and two, I think often these expectations get set because there's the perception that, hey, we can be as picky as we want if we're posting a job and getting 1,000 applicants per job. It's something I often get on my soapbox about. I think there's too much over-reliance on inbound recruiting versus outbound recruiting. And that basically you end up with this huge noise issue where there's thousands of applicants per job. Every internal recruiter has 20, 30 open jobs at once. Maybe you can speak to that, like the level of volume that you encounter working for a Big Four firm. I imagine it was up there.
See, that's the thing. That's the perception where a lot of people think that just because you are a Fortune 50 company or you're working for a company that, as like a Big Four, that you get an enormous amount of applicants. Depending on the field or the industry that you're actually supporting, that's not always the case. I've never been lucky enough to work in a position where you've had thousands of applicants. I've never had that luck. It's always been where I had to go ahead and source my own candidates. I had to go ahead and look for my own candidates. I had to screen my own candidates. I had to make sure that they had the fit. Having that conversation, that intake session with the hiring manager to better understand what they're looking for, what the skills are, the certifications, the designations, whether or not they're actually looking for a degree, so on and so forth. I had to go out and look for them. That was always the case. Again, I've never been lucky enough to have 1,000 applicants for a rec. Maybe one day I will, but I don't think I will ever, because we're in a specialized niche field. It's pretty niche when it comes to filling these roles, and the expectations of these roles and the educational skills that it takes for them to be successful. You just can't find everywhere. It's impossible.
Yeah, there's some certain skill sets that seem like there's just not enough of those people. Like I'm thinking DevSecOps or OT security, these very niche, very technical types of skills that there's not enough people. But then there's a lot more people that have more generalist skill sets, or say GRC or security engineering type prowess. So yeah, I mean, it seems like the jobs aren't evenly distributed, and they're not distributed in such a way that they match up perfectly with the number of candidates with those particular skill sets. So even though there's, maybe a ton of applicants out there, they're not always necessarily well aligned to the role that you're hiring for.
Exactly.
So I don't know that there's an easy solution to upskilling or, cross-training folks to where they could completely reverse the subdiscipline of security that they're in already. But if there's no market demand for certain skill sets, or there's not as much market demand for certain skill sets as there are candidates, what do we do? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I totally agree with the cross training and the upskilling and everything else. In a perfect world, that's what happens. That's what should happen, right? But it's not always the case. Hiring managers sit at their desk, at their table, or at their chair, thinking that, hey, these people need to come with these experiences. And once they have their mind set on something like that, they're not going to deviate from it. Again, it has to come to the recruiter's point of view, where they need to go ahead and kind of let the hiring manager kind of train them up to understand that there are transferable skills, that if you have SOX experience, you can probably do ITGC if you have a little bit of a background within IT. or if you have general controls experience in certain platforms, whether it's SAP or Oracle, it might be transferable to ServiceNow or something like that. But they stay stuck on one certain piece of it. And that does not allow for the candidate to upskill or cross-train, let alone be successful in their position.
Yeah, well, and especially when you're going out to the market too, I think it's important to consider the size of a given candidate pool. So one thing I've been offering to do for potential clients or just any hiring manager out there or current clients is, hey, let me conduct a search live for you on video so you can see exactly how many people are out there. Like I just talked to a company the other day. They're looking to hire a FedRAMP person, advisory, readiness type person in Knoxville, Tennessee, on site 5 days a week. And, just off the top of my head, I can say there's probably only literally a handful, well, I guess figuratively a handful of people with that skill set in that particular geography. And the chances that you're going to get that one of those 5 people to actually come on site 5 days a week, probably pretty low. And that's if they actually respond to your outbound. So I think it'll help us to kind of adjust expectations a little bit if we can have that discussion about the size of the candidate pool. But you kind of got to know what you're looking for to be able to properly define the size of a candidate pool too. Like you have to put together a good Boolean string and maybe try a few different things. But yeah, I wish that there was more outbound recruiting like you and I do. But it does seem like a lot of recruiters, especially on the internal side, seem to be relying on those inbound applications. And I've talked about a dozen CISOs in the last couple of weeks, and some of them have been looking for months, if not over a year, actively looking, applying to positions, just not hearing anything back. And these are executives with, tangible accomplishments and decades of experience. It makes you wonder, what the heck is going on out there if these folks can't even get a call? Is it just the volume of applicants to these jobs that are posted, or is it overworked recruiters? Like, what do you think? Why do you think people aren't hearing back in as large in numbers as maybe we'd like them to?
That's a great point. There's probably a couple variables there that are kind of holding up the process for individuals. One of them is probably going to be that there's not enough qualified applicants for that specific role. The other one's probably going to be AI. When you do have individuals that do have the abilities, the skills, the certifications to be able to be successful in that role, if you and I are not looking at that resume and it's AI kind of taking over the resume and kind of leveling it as far as if they should be moved forward or not, AI is not perfect. A lot of people tend to use AI. I use AI in a lot of various different resources and ways. But as far as with working with recruiting and being able to place people, AI is not at the level where it should be. It really isn't. So it's screening out a lot of individuals that normally would get a chance to move forward in the process. I've had that situation happen to me before where I've seen applicants and candidates that have the skills that we're looking for, but AI has screened them out. And with them being screened out, chances are that if you're getting 1,000 resumes, 1,000 applicants, you're probably not going to go back to look at those resumes. You're going to look at the ones that AI actually put through. So that's where the disconnect is there for sure, that you're getting individuals that are being screened out, being dispositioned out by the system without ever being reviewed. So that's one thing, or that's the second thing that's happening. The third thing is that recruiters, especially internal recruiters, don't have the time to go ahead and go through every resume like we do. As an agency recruiter, as a headhunter, that's what we do. I mean, we literally source individuals that meet the criteria that the hiring manager is looking to fill. So we do that on a regular basis. Internal recruiters do not do that. It's very rare that they do that. And if they have that skill, it's because they've been exposed to the headhunting area in the past. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's an interesting quandary. I think AI is going to get better and better. The question is it ever going to be as good as a human in terms of reasoning and quote unquote reading between the lines? It feels like half the time when I'm looking at somebody's LinkedIn profile or their resume, I'm looking as much out for what's not there as what is there. So trying to think of an example. So like if I was looking for, say, a pen tester and somebody had the title of security consultant, but then they had a bunch of like GRC terminology, then I would say, okay, probably that's not a pen tester. But if they had that title, and I know people at that company with that title are sometimes pen testers, and they don't have anything on there about GRC, it's either GRC or pen testing, and they don't have any GRC words, good chance that that person's actually a pen tester, and I can make an educated guess and reach out to that person and make a placement. But yeah, I've talked to multiple internal recruiters that say these ranking systems with, the more modern ATSs just aren't there yet. And they've made multiple placements of those folks that they combed through that the ATS didn't rank highly. So we'll see if it gets better. I assume it will. The question, I think, is how good will it eventually get? And is it ever going to be as good as a human? I think the jury's still out on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think AI is useful in a lot of different ways, and it's certainly going to shape the future of recruiting in a lot of different ways. I tend to favor the idea that people are always going to want to have some sort of human interaction, unless it's like just a really high volume or menial type of job. Possibly you could fully automate it. But I think there's a lot of judgment calls that recruiters need to make based on, emotional intelligence and relationship building and seeing how somebody communicates and reading their facial expressions. All of these things lead to good long-term placements. But is that something that a machine is ever going to be able to do very well? I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. I don't think it will fully. I don't think it ever will, because the emotional intelligence and the transferable skills that it takes for us to review and to kind of understand, I don't think AI will ever understand. AI at this point is whatever you put into it, you'll get out of it. It kind of gives you the information back in a different way. It's not adapting to what we currently do and how we do it. May that change in the next 5 or 10 years? Quite possibly. It's just not there at this point. But I don't think the emotional intelligence part it will ever have. I could be wrong.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if we ever get artificial general intelligence. I suppose that's really if we ever crack that code. And I mean, technically the current large language models have already passed the Turing test, I believe. So, you could make the argument that they're generally intelligent, but I still don't think they're able to reason per se, or make, judgment calls, that sort of thing. Like you said, it's very much like an algorithm where whatever you put into it, it'll run the sequence and then, spit something out on the other end based on what you put into it. So
right.
Yeah, totally agree with you there. Well, what's the future of, do you think the security and GRC market look like on the hiring front? Like my experience last couple of years has been very, very slow. Just not a lot of hiring going on, or if there is a lot of hiring going on, they're getting a lot of applicants, they're filling those roles very quickly. So what do you think the next couple of years looks like?
I think at some point they'll end up ramping up again. I think it'll come back to what it was, maybe not close to what it was, but maybe close to what it was, I guess I would say. There are a lot of products out there right now that are focusing on GRC, that are AI related. I don't know if it's working or not working, but I know there's a lot of products out there that are being marketed to companies to utilize so they can go ahead and maybe use less people in their GRC space. Again, I don't know if it's working or not working. I can't really talk to that, but I do feel that you do need a presence of a team to be there to regularly monitor the risks associated with security. I don't think AI will at any point soon cover that need. Again, I'm not a techie. I'm not a full techie. I understand tech enough just to be dangerous, but I think that in the near future, we should see some ramp up, because when you see all these things happening with these organizations that they get breached, they get hacked, I think there needs to be a staff that can actually do their job and do it right. So I think eventually that'll happen where we'll have individuals getting hired again. And you're right. Everybody that has positions open, they do fill them pretty quickly. That's simply because there's an abundance of individuals in the marketplace at this point. Our busy season for ITGC normally comes around July, August. I'm anticipating that it picks up again at that point in time, just simply because of the environment, the economic environment, and everything that's happening. So we'll see.
Yeah. I tend to favor the idea of a slow recovery. I think we're recording this in late February, so what's happening in the government right now is causing a lot of uncertainty, even in the private sector, I believe, and a lot of companies are still kind of in wait and see mode. They were leading up to the election, then it seemed like things got busier on the hiring front, and then now we're back to wait and see mode again. So, I think we'll see a gradual recovery over the next couple of years. The question is, how much of a recovery? I tend to favor the idea that we may at some point approach hiring levels of 2019 again, but probably never 2021, 2022.
Exactly.
Because that was kind of the big boom with a bunch of venture capital funding, rounds being handed out like hotcakes. And there was just, it was like a mad dash, modern gold rush, that sort of thing. And I think investors now are being a lot more cautious. And then two, I think we're seeing a lot of mergers and acquisitions type of activity right now, and divestitures and things that, again, just leading to more chaos and noise in the market. So I don't know. I hope things calm down, get a little bit less chaotic in the next couple of years, which I think they will. I'm cautiously optimistic, at least.
Well, as you can tell, I'm a Cubs fan, so I'm very optimistic.
There you go. So, obviously you've been a recruiter for a long time. What do you wish that hiring managers knew about recruiting, and how can they, more effectively work with us, do you think?
I wish that they knew that we spend a whole lot of time sourcing. Sourcing is not an easy thing. It's not. It's not a glamorous recruiting thing that we do. It's something that needs to be done and needs to be done right. And I don't think that they appreciate or understand how much time we actually put in sourcing the great candidates that they've hired. And that's the reason that you're paying. You're paying a premium for a recruiter like us to go ahead and fill these roles that internal recruiters can probably never have the time to do. So I wish they understood that a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, people don't realize the sheer volume at which most recruiters operate. So when I'm doing an outbound search and sourcing myself, I'll go through thousands of LinkedIn profiles a day.
Absolutely.
Easily. And I may reach out to 50 or 100 people per day. Back when I was in my agency life, I was making 50 outbound dials a day back in, the IT recruiting days. So it's a high volume, high stress profession that, unless you've done it, you don't really understand how stressful and how much of an emotional roller coaster it can be, especially when you're getting nice candidates wrapped up in a bow and sent in your inbox. And I think a good recruiter makes it look really easy, but it's certainly not. And then obviously you have to deal with is probably the wrong way to put it, but people are fickle, and they will surprise you even if you've done your due diligence as a recruiter and asked them all the right questions. There's always going to be somebody that lies to you, or that, pulls the rug out from under you at the last minute, maybe rescinds their offer acceptance 2 days before their start date, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes recruiters are a convenient scapegoat from both the hiring manager side as well as the candidate side, because we're the man in the middle, What do you think recruiters could be doing better, though, to the frustrated candidates and hiring managers out there?
I think it all goes back to communication. Communication both ways. You got to communicate with both your hiring manager organization, and you also have to communicate with your candidates. Communication is the key. It's always been the key. I don't think you can have a successful placement without having communication, setting expectations, understanding the process, understanding the company you're representing, understanding the culture that they're going to be working under. It's understanding your product in general, being a SME, for the organization that you're actually representing, whether it's the position that you're trying to understand or the company that you're definitely need to understand, because everything needs to be communicated to the candidates so they'll be fully aware of what they're getting themselves into. A candidate will appreciate that because you're being upfront, and the company will appreciate that because you're giving them partnership advice. Instead of being an employee of the company or being a transactional type of environment, you're giving them value for what they're going to actually pay for. So understanding what the role is, understanding what the candidate brings, understanding what the company is means a lot. And it all goes back to communication.
Yeah, I totally agree. Setting expectations being so key, and having some degree of transparency. I mean, one of my core values is transparency for that reason, because I think the candidates appreciate it. I think the hiring managers appreciate it. If you're struggling with the search, it's probably a good thing to tell the hiring manager, like, look, this is what I'm finding. This is who's out there. This is the size of the candidate pool. And this is what to expect moving forward. But, I hear from so many folks I talk to that I do job search guidance calls for these days that they're just not hearing anything back from recruiters. They'll have an interview or 5 interviews and then just never hear anything back from the recruiter. And I don't understand how that's possible. It seems like that would be the most basic responsibility of any recruiter, internal or external, to at least, get back to people that have, spent a great deal of time interviewing with your company or your client's company, or, just showing up to scheduled calls. I was just talking to a C-suite executive I've worked with in the past earlier today, and he was saying that he had a call with an external recruiter scheduled. He no-showed twice in a row, no explanation or anything, the second time. So, that's wild to me, especially when, the job that he was being considered for is probably a $50,000-$60,000 fee for that executive placement. I think it's kind of the bare minimum just to show up. But any idea why that might be happening, or it seems to be happening more often now versus
I don't
maybe
know.
in the past?
That's definitely my pet peeve, because, I've been in the industry for 20 years now. I love recruiting. I enjoy working with people. I love working with companies. I love the search. I love to search and find that needle in a haystack, that individual that's going to be successful in their role, whether it's at an entry level role or in a C-suite role, executive level role. So for me, that's a pet peeve. I can't fathom why individuals in the recruiting industry ghost people, because we've all been on that other side where we've looked for work, whether we were in our teens, 20s, or 30s. We've all been on that side. I would appreciate myself if I got feedback, whether it's negative feedback or positive feedback. Feedback would be appreciated. And I think as a recruiter, it's a happy time when you place somebody, but it's a devastating time when you have to reject somebody. And you have to do both ends of it. You have to go ahead and give the news, whether it's good or bad. You don't have to be specific, but you have to give the feedback, the background as to why they're not moving forward. Again, I would appreciate that. And that's the reason that I go ahead and give my candidates the feedback. So they can sleep at night, so they can get through the weekend, because we all know that usually on Fridays when we get feedback, and that's when you really should give it back to the candidate. Give it back to the candidate so they'll know where they stand. Hope is one thing, but devastating somebody's feedback or giving them feedback that's not, how can I put this? You just have to give the feedback, I guess, more than anything. Just be realistic, set expectations, be honest, just like you'd want somebody to be with you.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Yeah. And it seems like almost there's 2 different types of recruiters or recruiters, how they view recruiting. I think a lot of folks are just in it for a paycheck. And I think those are the folks that are more likely to ghost people, that all they really care about is making money. They don't care about the person on the other end of the phone or, the Zoom call. Then you have the folks that are, truly empathetic, that actually care about their job, that care about the people that they're working with. I think those folks are way less likely to do all of this ghosting.
It's transactional versus a partnership more than anything.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes, especially for agency recruiters, they may care more about how they come across to the hiring manager because they're paying the bills, versus caring about the candidate side and actually having some sort of emotional investment in that candidate's future. I don't think that's as common as maybe it should be.
Well, Pete, the way I look at it as I'm building a relationship. I'm building rapport with my candidate. this opportunity may not be a good fit for you, but in the near future, I may have something that comes my way that you may be a great fit for. So you want to build that relationship for future opportunities. I don't understand why you wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah. Well, and especially security is such a small industry, especially when you start looking at like sub-disciplines of security. Like I know almost everybody in the DFIR industry, it feels like, just because I've worked on so many of those roles and placed so many of those people over the years and worked with so many of those executives. Same thing in GRC, knowing all the major players and stuff like that. And I don't feel like I have the latitude to burn any bridges because word gets around, and you only have one reputation, and it takes a very long time to build and a very short amount of time to destroy.
Absolutely.
So,
yep.
And that goes on the hiring side too. Like, if word gets around with the candidate pool, and it's a very small candidate pool, that your company is tough to work for, the hiring manager is not a very nice person, that sort of thing, you'll end up alienating potentially your entire candidate pool. So any thoughts on that employer branding piece? Like, how can companies get better at attracting the right people and, building that employer brand to be, attractive over time?
I think it's a culture thing. I think it's setting the culture, whether it's 9-to-5 culture or return to work culture, or return to the office culture, work from home culture. I mean, it needs to be relayed in a positive manner, whatever that looks like. Whether, like I said, whether it's working in the office 5 days a week, or working hybrid, or working from home, remote, you need to relay the message of who you are. That identity, that brand of what the company is, what it stands for, is very important for a candidate to understand what the company stands for, what the expectations are. Again, it goes back to the expectations on communication. It's always knowing what to expect from the company. And that's how you build a brand, where you become a regular catalyst of the work that you do, the brand that you are. It just becomes known. And that's how you build a brand. Like you mentioned a few minutes ago, you don't want to burn those bridges because, everybody's going to know who you are. And the same thing on the company side. You don't want to burn those bridges because then they're going to know who you are, and they're not going to want to go work for you. So again, it works both ways. And that's how you build a brand for both either a recruiter or for the company.
Yeah. Well, and Glassdoor reviews are forever. So,
oh, absolutely. Yes.
You can certainly pad the stats a little bit. And I've heard of companies doing that where they're, not paying people to write positive reviews, but strongly encouraging people to do so. But at the end of the day, somebody's going to scroll through and they're going to see this, that everything's a 1-star review or a 5-star review. And if that's the case, that's probably a red flag. You're looking for some in between there, I think, if you're looking for legitimacy and that sort of thing. But I think a strong culture can overcome even the worst Glassdoor reviews. I've seen multiple companies rebuild basically from scratch where, word got around that the company was awful to work for. Everybody left, and then they turned things around because they actually made a concerted effort to get in there and fix what was broken. I don't think that's necessarily very common. I think often organizational inertia tends to take over, and a company that is tough to work for at one point in time is generally tough to work for at a future point in time, unless they get all new leadership, which obviously happens sometimes too. What do you wish that, I guess, what would you advise recruiters to know about hiring managers, especially the ones that you really enjoy working with? Maybe their expectations or that sort of thing.
So as far as hiring managers, I think to be a successful hiring manager, I would probably recommend that they know how to interview, that they understand the process of interviewing, because I don't think a lot of companies spend a whole lot of time teaching their hiring managers how to interview properly, how to identify individuals that will be successful in a role. I think they kind of fly by their seat of their pants sometimes. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed by both the recruiter and the company, because the hiring manager is going to be the manager of that individual. So it would kind of go hand in hand for them to understand what a successful interview process looks like, how to identify individuals, whether it's the STAR program or the STAR level. What do they call it? The
STAR method.
The STAR method, or understanding the situational behavioral type of interview, and how it works and how it's meant to work. Because not just rating somebody 1 through 4 is going to give you the right person. You have to understand the science behind it and what you're actually looking for in an individual that can be successful in the role that you're hiring for. Again, you need to understand how to interview. And I think that's an important part of being successful and hiring successful as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's part art, part science. Obviously there are those methodologies like the STAR method for interviewing. I don't know. My favorite hiring managers of all time tended to be very conversational interviewers, where they were getting the best out of people because they were being genuine and they were just being humans and talking to other people as a human. I think you tend to get both the best and the worst out of people when they let their guard down. So,
absolutely.
Best thing you can do is ease anxiety and get somebody talking, I think, and then they'll show you who they really are, for good or for ill.
And that's a great point, because the second point is actually that they should listen. If you listen, they will tell you everything you need to know. Plain and simple.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, some of my least favorite interviewers, they would tend to do a lot of talking, and they would ask curveball questions that were meant to trip up the candidate, which I never understood. I think an interview is an opportunity for you to find out the best and worst aspects of somebody, but you shouldn't be like putting your hand on the scale to tilt it in a negative direction, hoping that they're going to overcome that negative direction.
Exactly.
I think you want to stay balanced and neutral, and like we said, allow somebody to show themselves for who they are.
Yeah,
it can be tricky though. Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, how do you, I guess, balance the art and the science of it? Like, where do those judgment calls come into play, where you want to be careful about not being biased in some way, but you also have to assess culture fit? Like, how do you define culture fit, or help your clients define it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, that really comes about when you are consistent with your questioning. Going back to my HR days, basically, right? I mean, you need to be consistent with your questioning. The questions that you ask, you have to ask the same of every candidate that comes through the door. Again, if you listen, they will tell you everything you need to know about their background, showcasing their experience, their skills, their abilities, and everything else. And even if you listen to the answers to their questions, they're going to give you what they're looking for in a culture. They really are telling you. You just have to pay attention. And I think, again, it goes back to the training of the managers, the hiring managers, on how to interview individuals and how to look for keywords. It's kind of like what we do on a regular basis. When we search for resumes, when we search for profiles, we look for keywords. We do Boolean searches, right? We have to do our due diligence in figuring out who would be a good fit for something. Same thing they have to do. Whenever they interview somebody, you have to listen to the keywords, whether it's in their background, whether it's in their skills, whether it's in the companies that they worked with. The feedback that they give you is very important as well, as far as where they worked at and what they expect. So if you listen to that, you'll know if it's a good culture fit or not.
Yeah, well, and you can listen for certain keywords that are kind of red flags too.
Exactly, it works both ways.
Yeah. So what would be some red flags in your opinion if you're assessing a candidate for a client? What's something that you just don't want to hear, or would knock somebody out of consideration, I guess?
Whenever there's individuals that badmouth a company, that's definitely one thing that I don't understand why anybody would do. And I've had the pleasure or sincere experience, I would say, to listen to individuals that badmouth companies. I feel that if I'm going to go ahead and put you forward to a company that's looking to hire somebody at your level, but you're already badmouthing a company, then it might not be a good fit for you. Because it's going to be a representation of me submitting somebody like you. So again, it's those keywords that they use, kind of like if they've had individuals that they've or situations where they've got into arguments or discussions or didn't see eye to eye, those type of words that they use. That's what you're looking for, because you're looking for somebody that's going to be a good culture fit. You're looking for somebody who's going to be a good fit for the team, and more than likely can communicate, can engage, can be direct, can be flexible, can pivot, right? If they're not able to pivot with the examples that they've given you and for past examples with other companies, that may not be somebody you want to move forward with.
Yeah, for me, I'm looking for internal locus of control versus external locus of control. So,
Absolutely.
you know, the idea being that if somebody is blaming everybody all the time about whatever went wrong, that's external locus of control. That's not what you want. But if it's somebody who takes ownership over any unfortunate position that they may have found themselves in, and talks about how they would handle it differently next time, that sort of thing. I was getting into kind of a debate on LinkedIn the other day about how sometimes companies will perform back channel reference checks, which you could certainly debate the ethics of that or legality of that. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of companies do that because people will misrepresent themselves, or they'll claim that they were wronged when in fact they weren't actually wronged. And, the hiring manager wants to get the full story. So, you're not always going to get the full truth from a candidate, but I think you just have to look for those little tells,
Mm-hmm.
What are some green flags then, would you say, when you're evaluating a candidate? What do you really look for?
Well, of course, I'm going to look for individuals that meet the criteria of the job description to start with, for sure. I'm going to look at the companies that they worked for in the past and how long they've been there and what they did. Was there upward mobility? Was there training in between? Did you get certifications while you were there? That's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for individuals that are looking for more, right? That are looking to grow, scale, work for a company that will allow them to continue that movement, right? I mean, that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for an individual that's a go-getter. If that's what the hiring manager is looking for, that's what I'm going to find them.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't see any situation where a manager is going to say, well, I want somebody who's not a go-getter.
Yeah.
I've never encountered that.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah, I mean, it's always, we want somebody that's highly self-motivated, that's driven, et cetera, et cetera. I've kind of distilled my philosophy on hiring down to something similar. And I did a post on LinkedIn the other day about this. I think you should be hiring people that have the highest professional ceiling versus the current highest professional floor. So, that somebody who is currently very well qualified, but maybe they're kind of stagnant. They don't want to improve. They're kind of okay exactly how things are. That person's going to get outperformed by the person that's a higher potential individual that's more driven on some point in the timeline. Maybe not in the next 2 weeks, right after you hire somebody. But if you really want to get a lot accomplished with any single hire, I think you really need to look for that high potential individual that shows a lot of promise that may not necessarily check every single box today. Plus, from a retention perspective, people are more likely to stick around if they're stretching into a role versus if they've already done it before, then they may get bored too, especially if they're super high potential. So, we're actually coming up on time here already, Raul. So just one last question for you. Is there anything that we are not talking about, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring in the security industry?
I would say, I think there's a large pool of individuals out there at this point. I mean, I wish we had more openings to kind of fill those roles for these people. But I mean, I think that'll come in time. And I would tell everybody to stay positive, and good times will come. It's kind of like a roller coaster of emotions that we go through on a regular basis. Same thing will happen with the employment industry. It'll happen where it'll come back. So I think that's really the only thing I want to say.
Well, yeah. And I forget who said it or where the saying comes from, but you're like the average of, the 5 people you surround yourself with, something like that idea. So if you're, spending a lot of time on LinkedIn and it's all negativity, maybe think about changing up your network, maybe unfollowing some people, and try and surround yourself with the people that are either in the position that you want to be in or positively oriented, because by osmosis, you're going to become more positively oriented and, more successful as a result. So
exactly.
That's a great point, Raul. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do so?
Well, I'm always on LinkedIn 24/7 pretty much, and I have my notifications on, so you can definitely reach me on LinkedIn. Of course, it's Raul Ruiz. I also have my company page as well, Raul Ruiz and Associates. I have info at raulruisandassociates.com, always available there, as well as on my website, raulruisandassociates.com.
Awesome. Well, appreciate your time, Raul, and thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.